My research was a quest for some specific answers to very specific questions. Some of these were: 1. How did all black Egypt become all white Egypt? No, at this point the mulattoes were classified as white in Egypt. All North Africa and the Middle East, a fact that still confuses blacks in the United States, where the very opposite policy was adopted. What were some of the specific details in the process that was so completely blotted out the achievements of the African race from the annals of history? Just how could this be done on such a universal scale? How and under what circumstances did Africans, among the very first people to invent writing, lose this art almost completely? Is there a single African race? One African people? If we were one race or one people, how do we explain the numerous languages, cultural varieties, tribal groupings? Since as it seemed to me that there is far more disunity, self-hatred, and mutual antagonisms among blacks than any other people, is there a historical explanation for this? And how, in puzzling contrast, is the undying love for blacks for the European and Asian conquerors and enslavers explained? These questions, along with those stated earlier, constituted the core problems for 16 years of study. And while the outcome did not eventuate in the more detailed work as planned, I think I succeeded in summarizing the most significant highlights of my findings in the chapters which follow this preview. Origin and steps in the study. 1. Review of world history, believing that history of the race could not be understood if studied in isolation. I began a slow and deliberately unrushed review of European history, ancient and modern, and the history of the Arabs and Islamic people. I say review because by 1950 I had already studied and taught in the three fields of American, European, and Arabic history, a most fortunate circumstances for the task ahead. 2. Began the formal study of Africa and Europe. I did not know how very wise this was when the decision was made, for I did not then know that Europe and Asia had been hauling out of Africa. Over the centuries, just about all of the historical materials I needed to see and study at the very outset. Certainly, I knew from reading all about the rape of Africa, but to know the scale on which this was done, one must see at least some of it in Europe with his own eyes, and be amazed. The museums in various cities of the European colonial powers are the repositories of much of African history. Documentary sources, these are available in both Europe and America. Reports of colonial administrators in Africa, parliamentary debates, reports and letters from geographers, explorers, captains of slave ships, and especially rewarding the reports and letters from missionaries to their respective societies, homes, office. For the earliest records on ancient Africa and Europe, Greek and Roman sources were the most useful. See the bibliographical notes. Field studies. The field studies covered 2 years of work in Africa. Armed with a solid background in recent documentaries, the primary concern then turned to oral history and the developing methods of historical criticism applicable to it. Several chapters would be required just to detail the methods and procedures in this relatively new and rewarding field of oral tradition. Every region of Black Africa was covered. 26 nations in East, West, Central, and Southern Africa, and 105 language groups. Page 21. Scope of the scope of the study. We began in the lands bordering the Mediterranean on the north and extending southward on both sides of the Nile below the 10th parallel, thus including the Axum and neighboring kingdoms. This vast territory was the ancient Ethiopian Empire, a federation of anonymous and semi-autonomous kingdoms. The study began here, importantly because this was the heartland of the African race, where evidence of the first black civilization is still to be found despite all centuries of efforts to destroy it. From the researchers' viewpoints, the most important part of the investigation was the beginning of the task of singling out and clearly setting forth the precise nature of Africa's own independently developed civilization, a continent-wide study of the traditional customary laws of the blacks, for example, enabled us to learn for the first time that a single constitutional system prevailed throughout all of black Africa, just as though the whole race, regardless of the countless patterns, lived under a single government. A similar continent-wide study of African and social economic systems through the millenniums revealed the same overall pattern of unity and sameness of all fundamental institutions, that there is a historical and fundamental basis for real brotherhood and unity of the black race could not have escaped the notice of all those Europeans who have been investigating and writing about Africa over the years. But they are shrewd. Massive black unity will be massive black power, which of course will reduce white power in its domination of the earth. So white Africanist writers always concentrate on the ethnic differences among Africans, the tribal antagonism, the hopeless language barriers, the cultural varieties, etc. They even make a separate ethnic group of their own mulatto offspring from black women by classifying them as white in some areas and colored in others. Hence, a system of thought and practices was developed and superimposed on an already divided race to keep it permanently divided. No one can deny that in this effort, too, the whites have been most successful. Give y'all a minute to swallow that shit up. Shit is deep. Shit is deep. I wasn't playing with y'all. It's White Jim. Okay. We have presented in Chapter 6 enough of the traditional African Constitution and the fundamental rights of the African people to serve as specific beginning points for the identity and the discovery of the heritage we talk about without any definite frame of reference. Chapter 7 views the long drawn-out migrations as continent-wide movements that help to explain many of the most important factors in the destruction of the black civilization. For migrations help to answer the question, what happened to the African people, or what caused them to descend from the highest place to the lowest among people of the world. Even though the work was radically abridged, an innovation in historical research was introduced by going beyond all questions of doubt. The principal viewpoints of the work. This was the case study method by which a representative number of states from every region of the continent was studied: North, East, West, Central, and Southern Africa. In the view from the bridge and in the final chapters, I make a more definite break from the old line of historians. To be objective and more scientific, this school insists the research scholar should do no more than present the comprehensive and fully documented results of his investigations. There should be no subjective commentaries, no editorializing. One should just present the factual data and leave interpretation and evaluation to the reader. This may not only be the correct viewpoint, but it is even beautiful for historians who represent the already arrived people who control the world. They can well afford the luxury of historical knowledge for knowledge's sake, the great satisfaction that comes